Well, hello, citizens. Don't panic. John will be here in a moment. I know I'm not the face you usually see for City Square Podcast, but today is going to be just a little bit different, but you should hang around. So today, we're going to talk to John. He will be here in a minute. I will be off the camera, and you'll only hear from me. You won't see from me again this episode. But what I'm going to do is facilitate some questions for your host, John Herrera, my husband, and ask a little bit about his church planning days. Early history with City Square Podcast. John did an interview with Micah early on, and he kind of hinted a little bit about his church planning experience. And we just thought we'd dive a little bit into kind of the hills and valleys of church planning and kind of get into the everyday grime and grit about what it is to be a church planner. And that includes the suffering that you're called to when you start church planning, and that also includes the joys that you're living through when you're going through that. And so, with no further ado, citizens or my fellow citizens, I'm going to invite John to take his rightful place as the host of City Square Podcast. But first, as he sits down and gets settled, John, what are your thoughts on the Jewish tunnels?
I enjoy the memes. Memes are one of the brightest, most positive parts of our culture right now.
What's your favorite meme so far?
What's my favorite meme? I don't know about that. But I like the one that's the spin-off of the Ninja Turtles. Because I like the Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles is one of my favorite movies. I don't have a favorite turtle. I enjoy the Ninja Turtles though. And there's been some Mario ones that have been pretty good. But yeah.
Have you seen the weird one where the guy like kicks the hole in the sidewalk and he puts his camera down there and there's all these Jewish guys jumping up and down in like a stadium?
No, I haven't.
It was pretty epic. Anyway.
But I like the fun ones, not the mean ones. There's some messed up ones out there. Yeah. I'm not cool with those. But I like the fun ones. Hello.
Well, introduce your podcast and introduce the cat.
This is the head of security. Right now, he's patrolling the place, seeing what's going on, checking out different smells, and making sure that we're safe and prepared for the cold front that's coming in.
Okay, John. So I've got a couple of questions for you that I think would be worth asking you about church planting. So I remember our first conversation about church planting and kind of this is what God's calling us to, and this is what God's calling on you is. What are some of the biggest struggles that you had pulling the trigger on that? And what I mean is, before we even got to the mission field God was calling us to.
Let's see, because that was a while ago. I think for us, at that point, there was a lot of things for us that seemed like it was going well. Like we both had decent, steady jobs. We were making good enough money, not like great money, but we're making good enough money. Like we had just bought a house. We were plugged in to a church that at that time, I believe was fairly healthy. And like we were building up community. We had a small group that was at our house, and like there was just a lot of things that was going pretty well. And so deciding whether or not you're going to uproot your life and go somewhere else, I mean, that is a challenge. So I mean, there's that part of it.
Are you still in connection with some of the people in that small group?
I'm still in connection, yeah, with people from that group, people from that part of life. I mean, Micah is from that part of our life.
Sure.
But we're still connected. Probably like, I talk semi-regularly with about 4 people, either from that small group or from that era. our life still.
Which is actually really cool.
Yeah. But on top of that, it's probably even like I think when you are called to something, you still have like that doubt that kind of haunts you a little bit. It's like, well, am I actually really called? Or you start to like have like those little battles of like, I guess what could be considered a part of like the whole imposter syndrome and that kind of thing.
What do you mean by imposter syndrome?
I mean, it's exactly what it says. Like believing that fulfilling fulfilling a role or doing something that you don't think that, and like when you're doing something, right, whether it be church planting, maybe it's running a business, or maybe it's just whatever it is that you do, being like an athlete or musician or comedian or whatever, and feeling like you're in a role that you don't belong. Yeah. And so there's that you're trying to enter into that, and you're like already starting to wrestle with that part of it. Um, Feeling like you are prepared, feeling like whether or not you are equipped. Like there's so much that goes on with that wrestle. Yeah.
Let's say we got past that first, or we know we got past that first hurdle, and we packed up the house, sold it, found a random place online that a friend of ours in town found and walked around for, took videos, and we're like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's move into a house we've never seen before. We move in and we start church planning. What was the biggest disappointment early on? And then what was your overall biggest disappointment during church planning?
My biggest disappointments early on, probably my biggest disappointment early on, which was not a surprise, but it was a disappointment, was going there, trying to build relationships with a lot of the pastors and local ministers, and them not being interested in doing so. The majority of the pastors and ministers that were there were not interested. They either wouldn't return phone calls or emails, or if they did actually meet up for lunch or coffee or something, a couple of them would like basically said, we wish that you weren't here, that you never showed up, and things like that. And just different things like that. That would probably be my biggest disappointment. Again, not a complete surprise, because when you go into church planning, they tell you that's going to happen. But that doesn't mean that it's not disappointing when it does happen. Like in the early stages, I'd probably say that was probably the biggest disappointment. Later on, the other disappointments were things that were probably more so about things that I did. Like letting what I would consider a wolf in the church. Like that was disappointing. That was frustrating. I was mad at myself. That was probably later on, not as early, but later on.
What were some of the signs of a wolf that you caught yourself kind of pushing off because I know some of them where I really need someone in this position, but what are some of the signs that you're like, I should have seen that and should have paid attention to it?
The things that like I did see, but I think I considered not that big of a deal at the time, probably just because I was excited, was just like character issues. Like honestly, character issues, somebody being divisive for fun, not just trying to like be antagonistic, but like being divisive and overly controversial, things that I probably thought were secondary theological issues that led to more primary, like essential things. But I would probably say the biggest thing was treating character flaws like a yellow light and not a red light.
So you had mentioned early on one of the disappointments or one of the frustrations was calling up local ministry leaders and them kind of not reciprocating well. What was it like when you ran into a couple that were actually wanting to work or wanting to be interested or at least wanting to hang around and talk to you? Be
Yeah.
it maybe they weren't pastors, but
No, that took a while.
yeah, it did take a little while.
But like whenever we met, like some form of like a person that was leading a ministry that was willing to just have a relationship, maybe not even necessarily like do things together, but like have a relationship. Like, I mean, that was fun. That was exciting. It was refreshing. You were no longer like the only person on a desert island. There is now a second person.
And you just really pray they don't run away.
Right. And so, I mean, like that stuff was awesome. I mean, try to definitely like take advantage of that in the positive sense and just enjoy it. Try to like be of good service and usefulness to each other. Whether it just be like being a listening ear or partnering together to do ministry and spread the gospel, build disciples, and that kind of thing. But like, it was awesome.
Going from the sad and depressed,
right?
What is one of the biggest celebrations that you have about the time church planning?
So one of the things that I haven't said yet, but is like one of the things that was probably interesting, and that'll lead into like the exciting things is one of the things that is interesting. And again, this is not a surprise because everybody tells you this beforehand. But one of the interesting things is, and like I say this because I'm like you and I are not radically different than when we started. We have grown since then, but like we're not radically different. Like our theology has not radically changed. Our view on ministry has not radically changed. Certain things have shifted and changed a little bit, minor, but like nothing has radically changed. Like, agreed?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So I say that, yeah, like I say that, well, because like people should be like quick to listen and slow to change. Yeah. That's part of discernment.
I mean, if anything, we grew in the correct way.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So I say that because when we were church planning, one of the things that I noticed, and again, not a surprise because people tell you this will happen, but it's different when it actually does. But one of the things I noticed was like most of our obstacles and hurdles were either other local churches, other pastor ministry leaders, and other people that would be considered Christians according to the culture. Right, but like the people who we never came across anybody that was atheist, agnostic, or pagan, or whatever you want to call it, that was an obstacle. Most of those people that were that, we welcomed us with open arms or just did not care. Yeah. And so one of the things that I enjoyed and was excited about was being able to build relationships with people in the community. I had a lot of fun with that. Meeting and building relationships with other people that were running nonprofits and local businesses and that were involved in local governments, and just being able to build relationships with them that were so well that they knew that we were trustworthy and reliable people like in the community that were there for the good of the city, right? Because we were there to see the kingdom of God expand. That was one of the exciting things. And so with that said, the relationships is a part of the things, is part of my answer to the question, as the relationships we built within the community, and also the ones that we had within the church plant, and a lot of those people we're still like connected with. The discipleship we got to see take place, watching people grow in a lot of different ways. The ministries and services that we were able to provide to the church or also like from the church. I love doing that. I liked going from almost hating to preach in the beginning to starting to enjoy it, and growing as a preacher. Like that was a lot of fun. And like one of the things that I enjoyed that you probably didn't enjoy so much, like was a lot of the chaos, and like uncertainty. Just building and creating something from ground up. Like, it was stressful at times. It was stressful at times. It was hard at times. But like that lifestyle, like I was energized by.
So we know that church planning isn't easy, right?
Yeah.
And we know that, for at least for our experience and with a couple of others that we know, it feels like an uphill battle the whole way.
Mhm.
So what are some things that you learned the hard way?
Everything.
All right, out of that everything, give me 2.
So I can give you more than 2. I can try and list everything.
Besides the red flag.
Well, like that was a part of it. Like, man, like I don't even know. Like, genuinely don't know where to start. Like, try, man, like everything.
Everything the hard way.
Yeah, but like, so the city where we church planted wasn't a new city to us.
No.
Like, Alpine was somewhere we've been before. But I had to relearn the city again, like as an adult and not as a like college student. I had to relearn the city in the context again. I had to like learning how to like to preach every Sunday. I learned on the spot. Like learning how to network and build relationships with other churches, nonprofits, and all those people was something that I was learning the hard way. Learning how to balance and manage time was difficult. Learning that it's okay to be a pastor and say no sometimes was difficult. Making time for us is something that I am still learning and that is difficult. Trying to just create, whether you want to call them rhythms, whether you want to call them systems, whether you kind of call whatever it may be, was like difficult. Learning how to just be a spiritual leader in that as a pastor was difficult. Learning when to not cast your pearls before swine, as the scriptures say, like, is a difficult thing. Like learning and like everything is not always on you or your back. It's something that's difficult to learn. Like learning to stay content when things are not going the way that you want them to or the way you thought they were going to. And like that's not as like I don't think that's as inherently as selfish as it sounds. But like when things are not going like well, like learning how to deal with that. So like learning how to deal with the failures along the way and the successes along the way was difficult. Yeah, so without like getting like too specific.
Yeah, you don't have to get too specific.
Because like we mentioned one of them earlier was letting the wolf in. Like that was a difficult thing that I've learned along the way. Like learning how to deal with that and navigate that, which I feel like I did about as well as I could have at that time. And they, after we dealt with that, they were gone. But like when you're still building out of your house and that Sunday happens and nobody shows up, like that sucks. But like that doesn't, you can't let that define you or the ministry. That's just a day that happened. Like pastors and ministers, like not welcoming you in, like that's hard. Like not designating a lot of your time to individuals that are not interested in growing in their faith. Like you have to, you're responsible to God for your time, and so you got to like, you have to say no to things to people who are just there just to like suck your time. One of the things I mentioned that is not is a hard thing, but not a bad thing, is when you end up reaching people that you didn't expect to reach. Yeah. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but that is a difficult thing because you kind of have to shift a lot of the way you function. And so those are examples.
All right. So let's play pretend for a minute. So let's say I'm a struggling church planting pastor coming up to you and I'm like, man, things have sucked. I keep getting hit left and right. Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm struggling in my calling. I'm ready to throw in the towel. If you're sitting there with that pastor with a cup of coffee and you had to encourage them in some way, and I don't always mean the cheap encouragement, like, cheer up, man, it'll get good. Like, what would you actually tell them to encourage that pastor?
Who is like just having a hard time?
He's ready to throw in the towel.
Ready to throw in the towel.
But you know that this is his mission field. This is what he's been called to.
That's a hard question. Because like that's a hard question. I think that some of this might sound cliche for some people, but some of the things are just because something's cliche doesn't mean it's not true. But you have to remind people of their calling. And so like hopefully if you're a pastor and if you're church planting, hopefully that calling has been affirmed. Hopefully you've gone to people you trust in your life. Hopefully your pastor and other people trust you in life and they have affirmed that calling.
What? Pastors have pastors?
Hopefully. And so hopefully if that's been affirmed, you have to remind them of their calling. And like, that's a good place to start. Like listening to their story, listening to what they have going on, listening to their struggles and their successes, and reminding them of their successes, I think is important. But listening to their struggles and like reminding them that they're not alone, that there are others like them that are going through very similar things. Praying with them is important. Giving wanted advice and wisdom is also important. And like I said a second ago, praying with them like is important. And then if you have the time and the availability, like don't let that be your last interaction with that person the pastor or church planter like that is struggling. Because if you've been in this, you know this, but if you haven't, you don't know this, that pastors have a tendency to be some of the most loneliest people like in our culture. They tend to believe they don't. And a lot of times that's actually true. They don't. They tend to not be able to have people they can go to, that they can talk to, and that they can confide in, who will pray with them, people that they can't trust. That tends to be true for most. And so if you're able to be that for that person, for that pastor in that day, then if you're able to, don't let it be the only time.
So what I just kind of heard you say is, citizens, if you have a church, don't be afraid to stop your pastor and pray for him right then and there.
Yeah.
All right.
Hopefully most of, I would assume and hopefully that a lot of our listeners do have a pastor. Yeah. And so if you can call them, text them, or stop them on Sunday whenever you see them and pray with them, and that would be awesome. Yeah. Your pastor would not say no to that.
I would hope not.
Yeah. Really weird.
So on that note, so that's the sad part, right? Pastors are lonely, and church planting can be lonely. Even if you're married and have a house full of children, it can be lonely.
Yeah.
Would you do it again? Would you church plant again?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know when.
Well, of course, yeah.
But yeah, I would.
The drive is still to church plant. So part of what brought me to interview with these particular questions is, while we were church planting, I think Micah and you had already been tossing around some of the ideas of doing a podcast. And I remember being in one of our vehicles driving to Midland on one of the very few occasions that we could escape Alpine for just like a moment. And it was one of those, we'd been in the car for a couple of hours already. And I was like, it'd be really cool if like you guys, or I had just thought about you, but if you would start a podcast where you share the stories of a lot of these pastors. Because at that point we were pretty connected with quite a few, and we kept hearing stories and frustrations and we had been connected to another podcast at that point that was talking about similar things. And I was just kind of pondering it the other day, and I was like, we didn't get into these details, but how should I ask that question? So what is a driving force behind some of City Square podcast?
We talk to people about faith and work.
Yeah. But like, what does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean to talk to people about their faith and their work?
Well, it means just that.
You're not a very good interviewee, sir. It is what you said it is.
Because like, kind of like you just said, and I hope that me and Micah have said this a few times. Not that like I expect everybody who's listening to this to have listened to all those episodes, but my just hope is that we've said these things before. Is that basically we are, in a sense, hoping that we can basically tell the untold stories. That we can tell the untold stories of the regular, average, like everyday person. The pastor that people have probably never heard of, but who can relate to. The business owner who will probably never lead a entrepreneurship conference, but has a great story about how they got into their business and what it was like and how it's doing. Because people out there want to start small businesses and they don't know how, and they think that they can't. And us being able to tell those untold stories of the regular everyday person, like that's important and needed. Yeah. But like that's with Christian, like with pastors, ministers, Christian business owners, like people who are homeschooling their kids, but a lot of people want to do that and they probably don't know how. There's so much going on out there. And so like, if we can provide some kind of a platform for those untold stories, I think that's awesome. Citizens, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this conversation, found it interesting, if it sparked anything in you at all, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, click the bell. If you've been on YouTube before, which you probably have, you already know the routine. And any questions or comments or anything you may have, don't hesitate to drop them below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.